ชั่นสุดท้ายนะครับในช่วงเย็นนี้นะครับจริงๆเมื่อเช้าเซสชั่นของ BCG นะครับดร.รฤทธิ์ได้เล่าให้ฟังถึงเครื่องมือในเรื่องของการประเมินศักยภาพความพร้อมขององค์กรในด้านดิจิทัลช่วงบ่ายครับผมเรามีชุดเครื่องมืออีกชุดหนึ่งแต่ว่าเป็นของสถาบันหนึ่งนะครับ การอธิบายชุดเครื่องมือชุดใหม่นี้นะครับที่อยู่ในภายใต้หัวข้อ Digital Transformation Toolbox for your organization in the digital era นะครับ This topic is going to be presented by Director of the Digital Business Excellence and Co-Director of Leading Digital Transformation Program from International Institute for Management Development. Please everyone join me to welcome Professor Mikolaj Piskorski.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for staying. I know it's Friday afternoon, and I'm sure you have many interesting things to do, and so I'm very, very grateful that you chose to stay for this. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself before we get started, and it will help you understand where I'm coming from. So I was actually taught for many years at Harvard Business School as a professor of strategy, then moved to Stanford to learn more about digital, then went back to Harvard, and then actually moved to IMD. IMD is a very unusual business school. It's located in Switzerland, and one of the reasons to move to IMD is very pretty. You get lots of beautiful things, but the other reason to move to IMD is that we do executive education only, and we have a very small MBA program. Most of what we do is executive education, and actually we operate quite a lot in Thailand too, even though we're out of Switzerland. We do a lot of work here, particularly with SCB, Bangkok Bank, and PTT. So all of our sponsors are here. We do a lot of work with them, and I think one of the reasons why they choose to work with us is that because we're actually quite good at what we do. Apparently, we got some really high ratings, and in fact, we did so much work here that I actually November last year moved to Thailand, and I actually live down the street from here, so it's very easy for me to go. And like you, I'm thinking about my traffic to go back home. So I'm going to make it on time to make sure we all get back home on time. So what do I want to talk to you about? So listen, a lot of the things that you've talked about today were about digital transformation and really thinking about, the opportunities that digital gives you, and you can do so many amazing things with digital. But then there's that one little issue at the end, which is you actually have to implement it, you actually have to do a lot of these things. And it turns out that it's the implementation part that is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And in fact, most of the digital transformations where they go really, really wrong is with the problem of implementation. And a lot of us have actually studied this. So we have a center at IMD that's dedicated towards understanding what makes digital transformation successful. And what we've discovered in our research is that you have to do a lot of things right. You have to do a lot of things to get this right, to get to the success. So the first obvious thing that you need to have right is that you have to have the right strategy. You have to know what you're doing, and I want to talk to you briefly about what that is. But even then, once you have the the right strategy, you have to have the right speed for the transformation. But turns out that's not enough, because not only do you have to have right strategy and the right speed of transformation, you also have to get the right organizational design, and then you have to have the right people, and then you have to have the right culture. So you can imagine what this basically is saying is that there's a million ways in which you can get digital transformation to be wrong, and only one way to get it right? So kind of actually when CEOs look at this, and when some of the clients that we work with look at this, they were like, wow, this is going to be a lot of work. I'm like, guys, yeah, I'm sorry, this is reality, right? This is what you'll need to do. And if you actually forget about any of those factors, it turns out that you're going to have a lot of trouble doing digital transformation. So a lot of what you guys heard about today is really great until you actually have to start executing it. So that's why I want to share with you some of the what I call the toolbox for digital transformation, to really start thinking about the kinds of things you have to start thinking about for digital transformation. And to do that, what I want to do is I want to start with a case study, a very simple case study of a company that you're all familiar with. And if you want to watch this, I'll show you like a short video. If you want to watch this video later on, you have a link here, very short video. The company is Nike. And I chose Nike because everybody is at least mildly familiar with the product, right? We could choose some sort of, something that PTT produces, but that will be a little bit harder to understand, right? So let's choose something that we all understand, which is shoes. And what's really interesting about this company is that it went through digital transformation, and it went through a digital transformation, started that digital transformation a long time ago, and has been actually very successful at this, even though it really didn't have to do anything. Because, if you're in banking and you're not going through digital transformation, you have a problem, right? Because you know that banking is changing, right? If you're in telecommunications, media, you have a problem. But, in shoes, you don't have to change, right? Because there is no some sort of software disruption to shoes, right? The shoes are shoes are shoes are shoes. There's not going to be like a big disruption to shoes. That's digital, right? And yet these guys chose to actually invest a fair amount of money into making sure that they can actually do digital transformation. So they took actually a lot of money from their current advertising spend, and they spent a lot of money. They spent close to $2.5 billion globally in advertisements, and it took 40% of that and put it towards their digital transformation. And so instead of basically paying athletes a lot of money to sponsor to have their clothes on and basically get people to buy things this way, they said, you know what, we're going to build this ecosystem called Nike Plus. So what I want to show you is I want to show you what this ecosystem looks like, and then we'll discuss why they implemented it and how successful they were at this.
Fantastic. Well, if you like running, you're going to love running with Nike Plus. Picture yourself out on a run. With Nike Plus, that run becomes an endless parade of information about you. How fast you're going, how far you've gone, how long you've been at it, how many calories you've burned, it's all there, which is awesome on its own. But when you download that run to Nike Plus, you get your doors blown off. You'll see every run you've ever done, all the details, the whole enchilada. Pull up maps of your runs. You'll know exactly where you got lost. Got any friends? Awesome. Put them to work. They can cheer you on while you're running by posting comments to your Facebook page. Better yet, challenge them. If they're really your friends, they'll still talk to you while they're choking on your dust. Nike Plus recognizes and rewards you for your efforts.
I'm Allison Felix. Congratulations on your fastest 5K ever.
And when you're ready for your next challenge, Nike Plus will take care of that too. It'll create a training program for you and help you stay on the path to victory. See what I mean? Doors blown off. Now go grab your shoes, get yourself some Nike Plus, and let's get out there.
So there's quite a few things in this video, so I just want to make sure that we all understand what those guys have actually done with the money. So basically they built an ecosystem that had three different components to it. First, they actually put sensors in some of their products or used the sort of the sensors that people have, like their phones, to gather information about how consumers use the product. Then what they did is they created some new customer value by saying, look, now that I know how you're actually using this product, I can actually help you use the product better. And then they actually connected it to some of the other experiences that people were having, so they could basically post their successes on Instagram, on Facebook, or on Twitter, right? And so this created a really nice customer experience. They were some of the first ones to do this, and by now they've been actually copied by a lot of other companies, but they were the first ones to do this, to come up with this idea. And what's really, really interesting is not so much what it created for the customer, but it's also what it created for the company, right? Because you see a lot of copycats, and you see a lot of companies that have developed similar systems like this, but they're not shoe companies. And so these guys are shoe companies, and as a consequence of that, they were actually able to turn this data and create some real value out of this. The first thing they were able to do is they were able to actually change the way they market their product. So if you think about how people are marketing shoes, is they're putting these sort of big advertisements to say, hey, please buy the shoes, right? Or, hey, here's a sort of a athlete that's running in the shoes, you should buy them too. And the big problem with that, of course, is that a lot of this advertising expenditure is absolutely wasted. It's wasted because a lot of people are not in the market to buy shoes. Sometimes you buy a shoe, sometimes you don't want to buy a shoe, right? Imagine if I'm advertising to you right after you bought a car. It's wasted money because it's very unlikely you're going to buy a car, right? But of course, I as a marketeer, I don't know when you have chosen to buy a car or not, and when you're in the market, so I just have to advertise to everybody. However, with Nike, this can actually change, right? Because Nike is actually observing when, how much you're using the product, and so they can predict, therefore, when you're likely to be apt for replacement. So for a very simple thing that they do is they observe how many kilometers you've run in your shoes. And again, this could be chosen out of your, the data could be picked out either out of your shoe directly, right, if it has a sensor in it, or from your phone, if you're using your phone to monitor your running, right? So if I know that basically this, these two women, one of them has run 50 kilometers, the other one has run 800 kilometers, even though they are observationally equivalent, right, and on all other dimensions, I can already say, listen, I think this one is going to buy, right? I'm not going to advertise to this one because this one has only run 50 kilometers in shoes. There's nothing wrong with these shoes. She's unlikely to buy a new shoe. But the other one that has 800 kilometers, well, she's probably going to want to buy a shoe. Let me advertise to this one only. And you can imagine that with the advent of modern technologies, like Facebook or like Line, where we can actually be identified as human beings, right? So you can advertise directly to a person versus broadly. We can actually deliver a message to this person when they actually need to buy a shoe. And this way we can actually save a lot of money and make our marketing much, much more efficient than sort of displaying broad marketing to everybody. Not only can we actually improve on the timing of this message, but we can also be much more specific about what we're going to advertise. So it turns out that people actually very often buy wrong shoes. One of the critical factors for shoes is how soft the shoes are. So if you're running on soft surfaces, you should buy a different shoe than when you're running on hard surfaces. People always get that wrong, but and it's very difficult for me to, as a company, to figure out what kind of user you are. But now that I actually observe where you run, which I can again pick up from your phone, I can then give you a recommendation on what to buy. So I can actually offer you a better shoe. So not only am I cheaper in my advertising, I'm actually more effective. I'm actually offering you a better product. So that's the first thing that they've done. And it really paid off for them really nicely because they were able to increase their sales quite dramatically without increasing the amount of marketing dollars that they were spending. But here's even a better thing that they found out, which to me is actually sometimes mind-blowing that they did not know this beforehand. But it's something that also keeps me awake at night because, well, I'll explain to you why in a second. So here's what they found. You would think that the biggest use of an athletic running shoe is running. But the answer is no. Right? The biggest use of an athletic running shoe is walking. Right? Which is sort of interesting, right? Because you're like, really guys, is it really walking? I'm like, yeah, actually they do, from the sensors that they've picked up, something like 85 to 90% of time spent in athletic running shoe is spent walking, right? Shoes are essentially accessories, fashion accessories. And they had a suspicion that this is true, but they've actually never measured it properly. And only when they measured this properly did they realize it's walking, right? Something like 65% of athletic running shoes were never once run in, right? Which is, again, profound insight in the sense that, you know, here you are, you're thinking you're a running industry, you're a running business, you are in the industry for runners, and in reality you're in the industry for walkers, right? I often look, this is why I give them sleepless nights, you know, I often think I'm in education business, but sometimes I'm not quite sure, right? More maybe I'm in the entertainment business or some other business, right? I can't measure this, and since I can't measure, I can't tell myself I'm in the education business, but I might not be. And the reason why this is very important is that it fundamentally changed the way they're actually doing their R&D and fundamentally changed their doing their products. So two important things happened, right? The first thing is that if you're a running shoe company, what you care about is this, bottom of the shoe, right? Because it's all about absorbing shock when you're running. But if you're a walking shoe company, you don't care because the impact is low. What you really fundamentally care about is top of the shoe, because it's top of the shoe that generates the durability and the comfort. So they've actually fundamentally changed their R&D strategy and invested now in the bottom of the shoe and over-invested on top of the shoe. Right? That's the first thing. And you see this in their R&D patterns and their patents, etc. What's also really important is that if you're a walking shoe and you're all about fashion, it's then top of the shoe colors, things like this matter more. And you see this very much happening with Nike. So they basically, as a consequence of this, have developed a series of walking shoes. And in fact, most of the growth that we see in Nike is not out of making better running shoes, is making out of better walking shoes. And the way they got to the better walking shoes is that they've actually measured how the consumers use their product and acted accordingly, right? So this actually really paid off for them quite handsomely. I don't know if you can see this very well. Yeah, it shows quite nicely. One of these lines is blue. The blue line is Nike. That's their market value. The red one is Adidas, their biggest competitor, that didn't actually invest for a very, very long time in digital transformation. And look what happened to the returns, right? So basically, Nike, they both started from about the same market valuation. Nike increased by 350% or 250% increase, and Adidas only by 50%. More recently, Adidas really got on with the program and their market valuation increased, but it was a spectacular growth for Nike at the expense of their competitors. And again, $100 billion in market valuation for a company that makes shoes. I think that's pretty impressive, right? That's very rare to see that sort of market valuation in an apparel company. And a lot of this has to do with their ability to produce shoes that people want, and actually have very little to do with their original intention, and that's what they discovered through digital. So that's the first thing. So basically what we're seeing here is clearly a right strategy, using modern technologies, sensors and analytics to get yourself into better insights. So that's great. But there's even more sort of subtle things that we're going to be able to pick up from Nike, right? So we're going to now leave the strategy component behind. We're going to move much more into how do they actually do this. And what I want you to also take from this is the speed and the ambition. Because there is very often this idea out there that in order to be successful with digital transformation, you have to be extremely ambitious and you have to work really fast. And the actual answer research shows is that whilst you should hurry, you should not go too fast, and whilst you should be extremely ambitious, you should not be over-ambitious. And here's the way to think about it. In order to really best understand this, you have to sort of start thinking about digital transformation in terms of steps. Step number one of digital transformation is what I call digitalization. And digitalization is basically take everything that you've been doing so far and then digitize it. So no more paper, right? No more sort of manual processes, make them digital. No more separate businesses with separate silos for data. Have one big data lake for the entire company, upgrade that. Those are sort of basic things that you need to do in order to prepare for digital transformation. It actually turns out it costs a lot of money to do this, but you absolutely have to do this. And that's exactly what Nike did. It actually took them over 4 or 5 years to get this done in order to prepare the field to make sure that everything is aligned for the digital transformation. Then, once you have this done, you can move to the next step. And I call this step digital transformation of functions. So in the previous stage, what we did is we basically did nothing new. We sold shoes, we went to the market in the same way, we advertised in the same way, we did research and development in the same way, we just automated the processes. But now we're actually going to do something different. Now what we're saying is we're going to use digital to do our functions, or some of our functions, differently. And in Nike's case, what you've seen is 2 examples. One is they've actually changed their marketing, right? Instead of doing this sort of broad marketing the same way to everybody, what they've done is very targeted marketing. And instead of sort of some guy sitting in the R&D field and sort of thinking like, what kind of shoes should we buy, sort of make for people to buy, now we actually use real analytics to develop our R&D, right? And that's what they've done, and they have completely succeeded with this, right? By fundamentally changing the way they do marketing and R&D. But very often in digital transformations, and particularly in a fora like this, you hear that, oh, what you should really do is digital transformation of your business, right? Which is sort of the next step, which means, you're making money in this particular way. No, you should have a completely new business model, and you should make sure that, you're making this new business model the center of how you're going to make money. And, there's much to be said for that. But unfortunately, it's really, really hard to do. And so far, experience shows that most companies that are jumping to this are failing, right? And so I'm sure you guys have heard about General Electric and how difficult it has been the last 2 years for General Electric. And part of the reason why General Electric is struggling so much is that they went directly into this, right? They said, what we're going to do is we're going to look at data and analytics, and we're going to tell our customers how to make machines more efficient, and we're going to sort of go and advise them on how to do this, and that's how we're going to make money. And in some ways, General Electric had to do this because their underlying businesses were not doing so well, so they sort of jumped all the way there to say, hey guys, we're going to, transform ourselves immediately into this new digital company. And in reality, it's so incredibly hard. It's so incredibly hard to do this that if you jump all the way there, you're going to be in trouble. So, as much as it pains me to say it, what we recommend to people right now is to say, hey guys, do the 2 stages. Do the stage number 1, which is invest a lot of money in digitizing, get rid of analog processes, no more writing things on pieces of paper, have one single data lake, prepare people for digitalization, and then use what you have, use the sensors, use the platforms, use the applications that you've developed to fundamentally change the way you go to market, the way you do marketing, and the way you do R&D. And squeeze as much as you can out of those 3 functions. And then pause for as long as you can, and start preparing for that last jump, because that last jump is really, really difficult. And you're seeing some of that in Thailand. I work a lot with SCB, and SCB has definitely invested a lot of money in making sort of data lakes and sort of preparing for digital transformation, has started to develop a bunch of new products, but they're very, very cautious about completely jumping and disrupting their own business and becoming something else other than a bank, because they realize just how difficult it is to make that jump. And I think they're very, very smart to kind of almost go to the edge and then stop. And then maybe in a couple of years start sort of thinking about how they're going to jump over there. And I think Nike's hit a really, really good spot over there in terms of preparation and then jumping to the next stage, but not jumping too far. So that's the second thing that I think that they've done very, very well. And again, I see that mistake done many, many times, that either companies stop too early or they go too far. But there's some other things that I want to show you what these guys have done really well. If I can get my slide to go forward. Yay, excellent. The third thing that they've done, and I have to tell you, of all these things, I think it's one of the most important and yet the most difficult thing to do, is they've actually chose a very, very interesting organizational design to transform. And I show this to you because actually I'm sort of walking you through a case here to give you an example to make this a little bit more real and interesting. But if you actually look at research, what we're finding is a lot of companies, a lot of successful companies that are going through digital transformation are also doing that organizational design. And the organizational design looks something like this. Look, traditionally the way we started to think about digital transformations is we were putting digital somewhere in the organization. So sometimes it's sat under IT. It's like you IT guys are kind of digital, so you do digital transformation. Sometimes we do this in marketing. You're like, oh, you guys are in marketing, you're kind of ahead of everybody else. Why don't you do digital? And more often than not, what you find is if you put basically digital transformation somewhere in the organization, and particularly when it reports into a division, you get nowhere. Or you get a little bit of there, but you're not actually doing big transformation. And Nike went through the same thing. When they tried for the first time to do digital transformation, they actually gave substantial amount of money, $80 million, to one of the smartest brand managers for digital transformation. And what they got was nothing in return. Actually, that's not perfectly true, because think about what it means to give $80 million to the smartest brand manager in the organization, who has very, very, very strong profit incentives. He or she, in this case he, spent all of this money on marketing, which was cleverly disguised as digital transformation. But basically, if you look at sort of his incentive structure was like this. I'm being judged on profit this year, on deliveries on time this year, on margin this year. Everything that I'm getting paid for is this year. And you're telling me to invest a lot of money for digital transformation, and we know digital transformations take a long time. So he says, okay, so if I invest this money today, and I'm not going to see the results for another 3 or 4 years, and I'm going to have to allocate all of this effort to things that I'm going to be in the future, I'm not going to do this. Remember, we gave this money to the smartest person, right? I mean, he's smart. I mean, problem with actually giving, strong incentives to very smart people is they will always behave according to these incentives, and that's exactly what he's done. So they've tried this once, and they said, clearly this is not a good idea. So what they decided to do is they've actually decided to split the organization into two. And the split was basically into Nike Shoes and Nike Digital. And notice what's so interesting here. The first thing you should notice is the reporting line between the CEO and the digital division. It's direct. There is nobody sitting in the middle. And I can't tell you how important this is. How many times people said, oh, well, maybe we can have digital report to the IT, can then report to the CEO. Or it said, how about we have the digital report to the CEO, but can they not be on the executive committee? I'm like, no, guys, that's just not how it works. Right? It has to be seated at the table, directly reporting to the CEO, right? And the way they've actually done this at Nike was even more and more interesting, is they've actually given them a huge amount of budget, and that budget actually came from shoes. So the shoes people actually already disliked them, because they were like, hey guys, we are here, we're making all this money, how come it's digital spending? And it was done on purpose, because it was done on purpose to show the shoes people, like, you guys, you're going to have to work together with these guys. Even we know we don't want to, but you're going to have to, because these guys now have your budget for marketing, right? So this 500 million not only came for digital transformation, it also came for digital marketing for selling shoes, right? So in some ways what you're beginning to see is they separated them, and they actually gave a lot of power to digital. And that's not surprising, because if you think about what the sort of owners of power, is just the nexus of power, where's the sort of biggest power point in the organization, it's always going to be in the existing business. So you have to give power to the digital business in order for it to actually have any say in the organization, right? Furthermore, what they've done is they've said, look, we realize what the problem here was. The problem here is that these guys were profit center. And because they were profit center, they were constantly thinking about today. And we know that digital transformations take more than 2 minutes. So we cannot make you into a profit center. We need to make you into something else. So they made it into a cost center, right? And then therefore they paid them on completely different criteria than profit. And that actually was very important, because it allowed them to experiment. It allowed them to actually come up with some ideas that were unusual. One of the first things that it came up with was the fuel band, right? Which you now, a lot of you are sort of have these bands that measure your movement, right? That was first invented by people at Nike, and that was only because they were not responsible for making money here and today, right? And you gave them freedom, you gave them budget, and you gave them opportunity to invest, and freedom from the possibility that somebody at Nike Shoes could stop them. And in fact, a lot of people did try to stop them, because imagine being a top shoe company and somebody in digital comes up with an idea of, let's sell this plastic band. I mean, people in these Nike shoes were livid. I mean, they were so upset. They were like, guys, you're going to destroy the brand because our shoes are all about being sort of amazing and high-tech, and here you are selling from the rest of the organization. Even though we want them to give them direct dial to the CEO, we want to give them a lot of money, we want to give them a lot of responsibility, we know we cannot leave them alone. There's plenty of examples of companies that have done this separation, but they forgot to integrate it, and they've actually suffered a big, big price. Because remember, the kind of people that you're going to hire here, we'll discuss them in a minute, are people who are going to be very digital, but they're not necessarily going to be the best business people. And they will not know what kind of resources you have. So you need integration at a human level between these people. So they've actually taken some of the best people from Nike shoes and say, we want you to go to Nike Digital, and we want you to help them with digital transformation. And the other way around, they took a bunch of people from Nike Digital and said, go and talk to Nike shoes people so you can also help them. So what you want to do is you want to separate formally, because you want to make sure that there is no veto power from the shoes division. You want to make sure that there is enough independent thinking and enough ability to create new products on this side, but you want to bring people close and close together. You can't keep them separate, right? There's a bunch of examples when companies have done that, and it did absolutely no good to them whatsoever. You can imagine that this is easily described in a presentation like this, right? It's like, oh, you just did this, left, right, it's done. In reality, this was a lot of work. There was a lot of upset people. If you ever think that digital transformation is done with a lot of happy people saying, oh yeah, I love this is not right. I often tell people, if you don't have conflict in the organization, if you don't have unhappy people in the organization during digital transformation, you're not making this correctly, you're not doing this right? And it's kind of annoying, right, because you'd hope that companies would do this in a nice and polite way, but that's not how it works. So, what we discovered is right strategy, understood how that works. We understood the process, not too fast, not too slow, not too ambitious, but also don't stop too early, right? And then split yourself. And I'll tell you what, I'm actually seeing a lot of this. I've just lost my sticker that says speaker, but I'm still a speaker here. I gotta say, I'm seeing a lot of this. I'm seeing a lot of this in Thailand. It makes me really happy, because it really makes me happy, because it shows that people have, that the transformations that are going on in Thailand are happening. So SCG is actually adopting a lot of a similar structure. SCB, I think, has taken this lesson to the extreme. I want to show you what's happening in SCB right now, right? So SCB, you have your typical banking operations, right? And if you sort of think about what the main banking operations are, retail, right? And then the CEO of SCB said, I'm going to introduce an SCB transformation office, which is sort of like the digital transformation office that reports directly into him, and it's actually very powerful and gets a lot of money and it gets a seat at the table. But then he said, I'm going to have a separate data science office to the side that's also going to get its own person in charge of it and report directly to me. And then I'm going to have digital ventures, which I'm actually going to move into other part of that. They're still in Bangkok, but they're not close to Chatuchak, where SCB is headquartered. And then I'm going to set up an independent organization called Abacus that's going to be a data science organization that can serve us, but is also allowed to serve others independently, right? So if you look at this, the first thing that you should say to yourself is like, wow, this is A, ambitious, B, expensive, right? But I think when you actually talk to the CEO of SCB, he says, yes, this is expensive, but he says, I'm actually placing a lot of bets. I said, one of those will for sure work out, and best case scenario, all of them will, right? And so what he's saying, another way of what he's saying, what he's saying is like, look, I understand that there is so much weight here, right? This is where the center of power is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a lot of other centers of power in order to transform the organization, right? Another way of thinking about this is that, look, this may be so difficult to change, that the only way to change it is to sort of try different ways of changing, right? So I think it's a very interesting example, one that I'm following very carefully, just to see how this works out, right? And early indications are this is actually quite interesting. This is actually beginning to get some results and unexpected results. And I think that's exactly why he set up all these things outside of the existing organization. Because again, if you get a bunch of bankers, so this is not SCB specific, this is anybody specific. If you get a bunch of bankers to try and think about digital transformation for a bank, they will always come up with a bank. And it turns out that the right answer for digital transformation for banking services is not necessarily a bank, right? So you know, whilst we all need banking services, it's not always clear that it has to be provided by something that we traditionally think of as a bank. So if you're interested in this area, I'd really encourage you to follow what SCB is doing, but also what SCG is doing in this area, because I think they're great examples of companies that have taken this lesson very, very seriously. All right. So I mentioned very quickly that you're going to hire some new people in this organization. And you know, some of these people that you're going to hire will have lots of tattoos, and you know, they will play football, and they will sort of, you know, drink fancy drinks, right? And they will, I don't know, you know the kind of people are. They'll be cooler than anybody of us here in this room, right? But in reality, the most important people that you need to hire are these strange beasts called data scientists. And the reason why I mention this is that they're some of the hardest people to hire, and because the real data scientist, it really needs to possess an insanely complex set of skills. So I usually tell people that if you want to get a good data scientist, you need somebody who's a hacker, who's an analyst, who's a scientist, who's an advisor, and a strategist. And I'm like, good luck. Where are you going to find these people? They're very hard to find. And what do I mean by all of this? What I mean by this is that basically you need somebody who knows things like Python or Hadoop or how to do MapReduce, right? Knows something about machine learning, or preferably knows a lot about machine learning or natural language processing. Maybe has a PhD, so that, or at least an advanced degree, so can think like a scientist, right? Because you're going to do a lot of experiments and experimental work. And then knows how to translate all of this into business terms, and then understands the company's strategy to actually pick the right problems to work on. To be honest with you, these people are harder to find than unicorns. And that doesn't only apply to Thailand. You go to Singapore, it's the same thing. You go to China, it's the same thing. You go to anywhere in Europe and the US, finding these people is really, really hard. But these people are absolutely critical. I mean, go back to the example that I gave you about Nike and Nike shoes and the biggest use of athletic running shoes, right? And the biggest insight there is people are using it for walking rather than running, right? That insight was found by a data scientist who actually was just saying, let me just look what's in the data. And she actually was very, very intrigued by all these sorts of fascinating things, but I don't think she would have ever decided to focus on, you know, what do people actually use our shoes for, unless she was interested in these sorts of things, right? Because anybody can look at the data, but knowing what the right data are to solve is a very, very different thing. And actually she decided to focus on something very simple and something that's very central to the experience of Nike. I don't think you can do that unless you both a very good scientist, a very good statistician, but also a very good business person. Super, super hard to find. Super hard to find these people. And my experience in Thailand is working with companies and working with a bunch of data people is, again, I can either get somebody kind of to the left, or I can find somebody to the right. And I haven't found anybody who's sort of able to combine both. And again, this is a worldwide phenomenon, so I don't think there's anything unusual. So what we need to do is we need to then start thinking about finding teams of people who basically, you know, sort of like possess this skill and this skill, and another person in the team has this skill and this skill, and another person has this skill and this skill, and another person has this skill. So they have kind of overlapping skills, and so I can at least put them together in one room and they can talk to each other and kind of figure it out. Still very hard to do, but at least that's sort of a little bit of a solution. But again, also very interesting if you have children and sort of are thinking about how to educate your children. I think getting them to actually possess these sort of skills is invaluable. I think they're will definitely benefit from this. I know with my kids, I'm sort of already thinking about how I'm going to do that. And the other thing to think about is that, look, even if you find these people, how are you going to be able to retain them? Because again, one of the very, very big issues is if they have these skills, is your company the best place where they can work, right? And because remember, these guys will have the opportunity to go and work for the best, coolest startups right now, so you're going to have some sort of way of attracting them. And let's face it, if you are a big established company like, let's take SCB or SCG or even Nike, are you going to be the most optimal place for these guys to work at? And the answer is no. It's actually extremely, extremely hard to get them to come and get them retained because they said, this is so old-fashioned, we're moving so slow, why would I want to do this work? So how do you get them? How do you actually attract them? Well, this is where we actually get into the final part of our presentation, which is really thinking about employee branding and getting, how do we basically attract these people to make them want to work for your place. And there's sort of two schools of thought for this. The first one is, look, if you really care about employee branding, what you need to do is to have the coolest commercials about how cool it is to work for your company. And truth of the matter is, that is a really bad idea, because truth of the matter is, nobody believes these things. People want to see proof. And the only way you can see proof is if you actually change inside of the company. And so what we've been very much advising companies to do is that if you want to improve your external employee branding, you need to improve your internal employee branding. And you really start to have to work on your internal employees and get them to be as digital as you can, as quickly as you can, and broad projects where they really educate the existing employees on digital and digital transformation. And not only at the sort of superficial level, at the deep level, and not only at the top level, all the way through. So one of the things that we've actually done here with SCB is we've rolled out a number of online courses in Thai, translated in Thai, to a bunch of people inside of SCB, about 3,000 people inside of SCB, to make sure that everybody at SCB understands the principles of digital transformation. So when a real digital person comes in from the outside, or a data scientist comes from the outside and they're faced with an employee of a bank, the employee of the bank is actually able to talk to them in digital terms. And so the way you do this is an example again out of Nike, and has been widely replicated across and a variety of other places, is what you really need is what I call kind of morning to the evening approach to changing this. And the good thing about it is that not only does it work on your employee branding, it also begins to change the culture. So let me just walk you very quickly through some of these things are. First thing you can do is you can start getting people in the morning, you just get together and say, here's some digital people, here's some non-digital people, meet with each other, start telling each other stories. So these are not top-down approaches, these are not nothing that basically, HR says you will now become digital. This is basically bringing digital and non-digital people together so that the digital people can tell the non-digital people more. This is often also done under reverse mentoring idea, where some of the younger generation is teaching the older generation that is more senior to them about digital technologies. First thing. Second thing, people need to eat lunch. They can go and eat lunch on their own, they can go to cafeteria with their friends, or, you know what, you can bring them to the cafeteria and you can provide them with interesting speeches or interesting ideas about the kind of new technologies that are happening, right? So, for example, the Nike has talked a lot about the future of sports and what is sports going to look like and what is sports spectatorship going to look like in the future. And one of the things that you might know is really, really big in Thailand is esports, right? It's one of the trends that actually Nike spotted a long time ago and has been playing a lot in that area. That came out of listening to these talks. Again, doing demonstrations, doing technology demonstrations, super important, super key, and integrated into flow of every day, not a problem for people to attend. Then you do a bunch of online courses that people can take in the afternoon, very short time, and then basically to work. So again, not a centralized approach, very decentralized approach, very much people talking to each other, because that's where really the most important part comes in, is when in the depths of the organization, not only at the top level, people are interested in digital. So, my time has run out, my final slide, not too bad. So, all I want you guys to walk away from is for the success. It's going to be a complicated thing. We need strategy, which we saw with the introduction of sensors and analytics to really understand how the customer is using your product. Great place to start. Right speed of transformation, not too fast, not too slow, not too ambitious, but not too conservative. The design component, incredibly important, very painful for the organization, but really thinking about how you're going to shift the power in the organization towards digital and make sure that they're independent and they have their own budget to really drive digital. And again, watch the space here in Thailand for what SCB is doing and SCG is doing. Right people with a particular emphasis on data and data scientists. They're the most scarce resource right now and the one that we really need to go after. And in order to get them really attracted to the organization, but also get the organization to move, focus a lot on education. There's no better way to change the culture of the organization than really educating the people on the opportunities in digital. And if you put all of these together, you might have a chance at successful digital transformation. Thank you so much. I really, again, appreciate you guys being here on Friday, and I'll open up the stage to the next speaker. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Just a quick one. Would be nice.
Oh, question?
Yes, but I think... yes!
Thanks a lot, Professor Mikolaj. So, sorry to be me again, but you mentioned about the right people, the right culture. You mentioned about, when you go through a transformation and people were so happy, maybe you didn't try hard enough. But that kind of culture to Thai people, being shy, avoiding the conflict, and I'm glad that you work with a lot of Thai organizations, and SCB is the first bank in Thailand. Do you see, the harmony with that culture to the way that we should do in order to transform our, company to the digital? Or you see the conflict, or how these two things can live in harmony?
No, I mean, I do think that, and I actually wish Kunal was here with me, because that is a concern. That is a concern. But to be honest with you, it's not only in Thailand that this is a concern. So even inside of Europe, there is a number of cultures that are very conflict avoidant and consensus driven. So all of the Scandinavia is extremely consensus driven and conflict avoidant. So and there's other parts of the world where this is also true. So listen. So I think there's ways in which companies do this. I think there is a way in which companies do this. It just basically they kind of take a shortcut through it. So what I've noticed in Thailand that works really well is to basically even give more power to the digital people. And in some ways, I think that the reason why SCB has invested so much in digital transformation by establishing a lot of alternatives is partly a response to that, right? So I think what you're seeing is that they said, look guys, okay, so we have two choices. Either we do this internally, but that is going to involve a lot of fighting, and we're just not good at fighting, so we're not going to do this, so we're not going to move. So let's give a lot of power to the organizations that are going to take us forward, and let's show everybody that they're successful. And once we establish the success outside, then we're going to kind of work together on merging it together. And I think that's the solution. So I think what unfortunately this means is that you in some ways maybe postponing the conflict, or you're making it, making it later. But at least then you've demonstrated success with some of your ventures. And then it's easier for people in the older part of the organization to kind of catch up. And I think that, and I'm seeing actually, so I actually work a lot with the biggest Norwegian bank, and also work with Skanska, which is one of the biggest construction companies, and they're out of Sweden, and they're basically doing the same thing. So I think that's a sort of there's a recipe for cultures that are more conflict avoidant, is just overinvest, separate the organizations even more, let those guys run, let them be successful, and then integrate, because then it's, I think, easier to do that. So it's probably more expensive, but it's probably the only way to move forward. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Professor.